Hmm. Uh, huh?
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, featuring your hosts, Taylor Field and Ruben Olson.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues, Campfire Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're going to be talking about the Willington Mill, which was a former famous haunted house located in England near Wallsend in North Tyneside. But before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca. You can also find us on our social media channels, Cryptid Clues on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And we're also on Patreon, where you can get ad-free, exclusive early episodes available there. But I just want to say again, thank you for the overwhelming amount of support that we've been getting on this show. Ruben just had a solo episode last week. This is his first solo episode that he did, and he dives into a whole dose of new Bigfoot evidence. It's definitely a good episode to check out. So, without further ado, let's get into this. Now, the Willington Mill. This is a building that was one of the first steam-powered mills in Europe. It was constructed in 1805, and it seemed very prominent, like everything was going on. And a little bit of like backstory here. Just the reason I was able to find out about this, because I had never heard about it, I was traveling and I found this really awesome book. It's a very old book, but it just is littered with encounters and experiences from all different walks of mysterious parts of this world. So I thought, this is great. I love this. And it's got all these big headlines, so it's got like 400 pages. I flipped through it, and I just let the pages fly. I closed my eyes, and I just let my finger drop randomly in the book, and it landed on the Willington Mill. I thought, okay, this is interesting. Let's start looking into it. So I read a bit about it, and I started doing some research online, and it's really, really cool what kind of spooky things have kind of unfolded at this place. So a gentleman named Mr. Joseph Proctor originally owned the building along with George and Thank when they were both cousins several generations ago. And again, this was said to be the home of ghostly apparitions residing there. And I don't believe this was definitely the case at first. This is something that kind of started to seep in after the fact. It stated actually that there was a female worker that died and had haunted that building, and her name was Kitty. So the mill actually had an adjoined home next door where Mr. Proctor lived with his family, and that's mostly where all these things really went wrong. One such manifestation actually involved Mrs. Proctor's sister staying at their house, and she had claimed that her room started experiencing some paranormal things. Her bed began violently shaking, and curtains would raise up on their own and drop back down again. The curtains were actually removed the following day, which resulted in full-body apparitions where it would float out of the wall. An apparition of a female appearing almost as a grayish hue to the point where she would be sleeping in her bed, and then this apparition would be leaning over her, and she would open her eyes and see it. And things got pretty bad for the sister there. Mrs. Proctor did have a brother that stayed as well, but it did not come back. But the sister was much more nerves of steel. There was another woman that mentions how she was cleaning up her room. Having seen a white towel on the ground, she motioned over to pick it up, only to see it lift up off the ground by itself and move to another spot in the room. It eventually flowed out the door, like underneath out the door, towards the stairs, to which the woman claimed to hear footsteps going down the stairs. These steps were also reportedly heard by Mr. Proctor and other members of the household. Finally, enough was enough. On July 3rd, a gentleman named Mr. E. Drury arrived at the house to spend the night alongside his companion, Thomas Hudson, and the house was completely locked and a full house inspection took place. After having satisfied themselves on no one else being in the home aside from Mr. Proctor and another household maid, what followed has been recorded in the account. Now, a noise was heard at approximately 11:50 p.m. A few minutes afterward, both Drury and Hudson heard a noise as if footsteps walking across the floor. A few minutes after, a knocking noise was heard, followed immediately by a hollow cough from which the apparition proceeded from. The following events are further described in a letter from Mr. Drury dated Sunderland, July 13th, 1840, addressed to Mr. Proctor. And I quote, "I took up a note which I had accidentally dropped and began to read it, after which I took up my watch to ascertain the time, and found that it wanted 10 minutes to 1. In taking my eyes from the watch, they became riveted upon a closet door, which I distinctly saw open, and also saw the figure of a female, attired in grayish garments, with the head inclined downwards, and one hand pressed upon the chest as if in pain, and the other, the right hand, extended towards the floor, with the index finger pointing downwards. It advanced with an apparently cautious step across the floor towards me. Immediately as it approached my friend, who was slumbering, its right hand extended towards him. I then rushed at it, giving at the time, as Mr. Proctor states, a most awful yell. But instead of grasping it, I fell upon my friend, and I recollected nothing distinctly for nearly 3 hours afterwards. I have since learned that I was carried downstairs in an agony of fear and terror." End quote. Now, I also have another claim here as well. And this appearance presented was that of a bareheaded man in a flowing robe like a surplice, which glided backwards and forwards about 3 feet from the floor, or level with the bottom of the second-story window, seeming to enter the wall on each side and thus present a side view in passing. It then stood still in the window, and a part of the body came through the blind, which was closed down, and the window, as its luminous body intercepted the view of the framework of the window, it was semi-transparent, and as bright as a star, diffusing a radiance all around. As it grew more dim, it assumed a blue tinge and gradually faded away from the head downwards. So, initially, the Proctors actually dismissed any paranormal occurrences in the house and refused to believe much of it at first. A few house workers kept reporting ghostly noises that would occur, and the forms mostly of footsteps and such, leading to many workers actually quitting their employment on the property, and I don't blame them. If someone isn't really doing anything about this and you're consistently working in a haunted house place, and a lot of these houses back in the day, you were living there if you were a servant or a maid or working on the grounds, and this just becomes your life, and that's something that's very hard to take upon yourself. So the Proctors, again, they dismiss these things, and they had a tendency of not telling new hires about these paranormal ongoings. One such lady was hired as a nurse to be working in the home, and she could hear loud footsteps coming from the room above her. Having wondered who it was, she addressed this matter with Mr. Proctor, whom simply discarded the notion as just an old house making creaking noises, as old homes do. It wasn't until the next day that things started to get even more weird. While the Proctors were all downstairs eating dinner together, the nurse came rushing downstairs with her eyes frantically widening as soon as she saw everyone. She claimed to have heard a heavy-set, what she believes to be a man, loudly walking about in the room above her yet again. Only this time it was for well over 5 minutes straight. Her disruption of dinner was to simply reaffirm herself that it wasn't Mr. Proctor walking about upstairs, but someone or something else. Now, Mr. Proctor went and inspected this room, but could find no source of breaking and entering. The main door had been nailed shut, and the room's only window was still completely boarded up. The flooring was mostly covered in soot, which, if you don't know, is kind of like a wet dust, and it kind of blankets over undisturbed areas. And this soot, however, showed no footprints or disturbances anywhere. And with that, I'm just going to jump to a quick ad break, and we will be right back. And we're back. So, we have Mr. Proctor finally giving it a little bit and saying, okay, I'm going to go and inspect this room. I'm going to take a look. Seeing no evidence, this would only, again, kind of reaffirm his stance, himself and his family, of dismissing these things. These occurrences increased tenfold afterwards. The Proctors began experiencing bed shaking, visual and more auditory events all throughout their house, particularly the kitchen, with chairs stacking in random positions and objects actually being casted everywhere, like utensils and food and everything. So the chefs of the house would actually come down and find all these things scattered about. The groundskeepers even started experiencing things out in the yard surrounding the home as well. Now, the Proctors lived like this and in that home for well over 11 years until they finally decided to move away. It is worth noting that one of the chefs, she was staying in a room with the sister we mentioned earlier, and the door of their room has like one of those big old-fashioned like bolt latches that actually slid open. The door swung open, and through their curtain draping over the bed in the bed frame, you could see, according to their claim, a shadowy figure moving along it. Now, one of the most significant reasons for moving out of this home for the Proctors was the mental toll that this was taking on their children. Having figures get closer to their babies' cribs, their cribs shaking, and again, their beds shaking as well, not just the Proctors themselves, but their children, and much more. One of the children actually said that they saw a spectral form that appeared almost identical to himself, simply just pacing back and forth around in his bedroom. I can imagine that if a haunting gets worse and you start to see yourself as a ghost, that isn't a good sign of what's to come. That's at least how the Proctors saw it, and after moving away, the house was eventually split into 2 apartments. And come 1868, one family immediately moved out after more haunting occurrences took place. Jumping ahead to 1890, the mill was closed down and converted into a warehouse. While the home was redivided into more suites for living, one of the Proctor children, actually now being grown up, returned to the home to inquire, only to find that no such hauntings still occurred. Some of these hauntings recorded were that of an older woman and an older man, and the scary things that started to unfold consisted of, again, their beds were shaking and some of their mattresses were actually raising into the air while they slept. And there are some records of them describing what it was like, almost like a big, strong person standing underneath, lifting the bed up from under them. Whistling in the house occurred quite often, actual vocalizations, and even grotesque appearances where these spirits would appear and, I guess, choose to take form of something very hideous. Like I mentioned, door bolts sliding open, shadowy figures moving in and around the home, and even unknown heads manifesting and appearing behind furniture, watching members of the household. That one really gets me. That one's definitely terrifying. I feel like that would be something you'd have to anticipate in your peripheral vision to prepare and not panic when you notice it. But a lot of these things, I got curious. So I cross-referenced this with some of the occurrences that my own family members have experienced in haunting. And I thought, okay, it's incredible how much can actually be related and how much you could probably credit as being true. When that's one of the biggest cases of evidence, having different people from different periods of time go through the same things. Because my family doesn't know about this. They are completely oblivious to the Willington Mill. I haven't flipped through this book yet and put my finger down to show them. That was me doing it on my own accord, in privacy of my home. So when I mentioned these things to them and they're like, oh, this seems very familiar. I've gone through kind of a similar experience. I thought, okay, this is fascinating because this is the thing you can attribute to cryptids and other UFO encounters that people experience on their own. And it's again why I like having someone else to be standing nearby to reaffirm your experience, and then you can share those experiences and other people like, hey, this same thing happened to me, this thing did these motions, it said these things, and this is the same thing I can attribute 50, 25, heck, even 100 years later in someone else's occurrence. So it's quite fascinating. Now, at the time, this home did become quite the story of being a haunted location, but it seems as though, like everything, it has inevitably moved on as well. So, again, at the end of the day, hauntings are very real. I've done a few episodes that focus on my family members' hauntings and experiences, and it's amazing how they always are associated with this home, these grounds. Now, I was trying to look into the history of this property, and I couldn't find anything that was really explanative of what the origins were. Now, it seems like the kind of go-to narrative is this woman died while working, and this is what prompted it. Now, I won't dismiss that because it's very plausible that could be it. And once you have one thing that's kind of opened up, it can create like a gateway to reveal more things paranormal to happen. But at the same time, you're dealing with a family that dismiss these things. So when you take a household that's not very open and receptive to this sort of thing, then that does add an extra kind of barrier. And while that is definitely a good thing to have, I think that's the case with most people in this day and age. It is unfortunately a sad realization too, because you're dismissing these things and you don't allow these things to come in. Again, these things can be very dangerous, and this thing, whatever it was, starting to take the form of family members and getting closer to the baby's cribs, shaking the beds. It seems like it's either violent, getting to be violent. I mean, ghosts can be kind of cheeky, moving things around and stuff like that, and as you can see and hear in most encounters. But I think that it's escalation is one of the things that you need to be worried about. And when escalation happens, then things need to be dealt with. And in this case, that's exactly what occurred. After they started inspecting this room where the footsteps were, things started to really get progressively bad. And that's something you need to be careful of. Was there some trigger item? Was there something that was just prompting these things to just become more frequent? I can't speak to that, but I'm wondering why that room was boarded up in the first place. What was the initial ongoings that took place there to result in such a extreme method of circumstance? Because, well, the door was nailed shut. That window, like I mentioned, it was boarded up. But they went to extra measures. Again, I can't confirm if this was the Proctors that did this, but it was plastered up and like significantly blocked out. So no, not even any sunlight was shining through there. On the day that the Proctors were leaving, funnily enough, they spent a whole day moving out with their servants and everything like that to get out of the home, and just one clean sweep job, get out. They were going to see things through, so the servants, their kids, everyone was gone, and the Proctor and Mrs. Proctor stayed in the home for one final night just to close out the sale and everything. And while they were in there, the house was completely empty. They reported that that final night, all they could hear was boxes being dragged down the stairs, commotion, everything, almost as if the day was being replayed while they were sleeping. Again, there was nothing in the home, no boxes or anything, but however you want to interpret that, I leave it up to you. It's a fascinating thing to hear, and I almost wonder, at times, is ghostly experiences just an alternative playback of sequences? Like, I know that probably doesn't make much sense, but let's look at the example of Insidious. Now, if you haven't seen this movie before, I will do my best not to spoil too much, but there is a place behind our place called the Further, and when you're exploring this area, you can almost see it's like a retelling where things are occurring, and they're clearly not in our time period. While some moments are, other moments are from different points in time, significantly the past. And they're just like on a constant loop of playback going again and again and again. And what if that is a similar application in here with Proctors were trying to sleep and everything was on playback in their home just one final time. And that being said, when the Proctors left, again, these hauntings still occurred, but they started to simmer off and things started to become normal again. The hauntings did not follow the Proctors to their new home. They were able to live in peace and quiet without any concerns or anything like that. So that is good. But yeah, it just makes you wonder. So was it the grounds? Was it the room that they unleashed something? Or was it something further than that? I guess only time will tell. Or if you've managed to figure out those answers and done even more research than I have, like, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. But that is all I got for today's episode. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. If you had any paranormal encounters yourself, be happy to share them with us and send us an email. CryptidClues@gmail.com is how you can reach us. You can also, again, find us on our social media channels, Cryptid Clues, and on our website, CryptidClues.ca. So until next time, I'm Taylor, and we'll see you guys soon. Stay safe and take care.